Well, good morning, folks. Welcome back to Three Zen. This morning, I'm going to begin with a few short stories from my experiences going through T38 PIT at Randolph, January or February 1975 through May 1975. Now, I had just come back from Southeast Asia, where I spent a year flying rescue C-130s, and really enjoyed that tour. But be that as it may, I came back to the T-38 Advanced Air Force Base. And after about 6 weeks of training, they call it pre-pit, where they went through and got you pilot qualified in the aircraft. Then we went down to Randolph to learn how to be instructor pilots. So I went down there and I was pretty excited about flying the T-38, and I loved what I saw advance. I just thought it was going to be a great assignment, and I was really looking forward to it. So we coast into Randolph and are assigned to D flight. Captain Jake Jacobs was the flight commander. Dick Midkiff was the assistant flight commander. And they had just for the most part, a group of good instructor pilots in there, good guys to work with. Of course, except the knothead I drew. I drew a guy, had been a former A-1E pilot in Vietnam, and he was just a little bit of a jerk. I guess that's putting it politely. But anyway, when we all mustered in the flight room that morning, first morning, this guy took it upon himself to look across the room at nobody in particular and said, "Why is it I always get stuck with the damn heavy drivers?" Now, there's four of us sitting at the table, four prior service heavy drivers. I had experience in C-141s at the time and HC-130s. Tom Nelson had just come off of EC-121s. Jim McDonald had come in from flying tankers, and Dale Masuda was another C-141 pilot. So we just sat there and kind of looked at each other. What brought that about, But anyway, be that as it may, each one of us handled the jerk in his own little way. And looking back at it, it's kind of hilarious in a lot of respects. I began flying with them, and I'd done okay. Actually, I did pretty well in T-38s in pilot training. And I was just really loving the experience. So my first, encounter with the jerk was when I was doing aerobatics one morning. And you go to PIT to learn things. It's not a continued evaluation, but that's kind of the way it felt when I was flying with this guy. I was always being evaluated. I wasn't learning that much except from the debrief of my mistakes. Well, that's not the idea. But anyway, so I start this over-the-top maneuver, and our areas went up to 23,000 from, I think, 9,000, maybe 11,000. I can't remember. Doesn't matter. So anyway, I'm on my way up, and Numbnuts starts singing, "You're not going to make it," meaning you're going to bust the area of the top of the area. Well, at first I didn't understand what he was saying. He says, "You're not going to make it." So finally, as I went through the vertical, I saw what he was talking about. Sure enough, it looks like I was going to bust out the top of the area. So I just hit the mic button and I said, "Houston Center, Reno 17, request a area extension to flight level 260. And they came back and said, "Granted." And this guy says, "You can't do that." I said, "Well, I just did." So that way, by getting that area extension up to 26,000, I went over the top of the loop and came back down, and then canceled. Houston Center, cancel the extension. Thank you. And that was it. Now, to give you a sense of perspective, on the way up, he says, "Hey, another way of approaching that, instead of 'you're not going to make it,' 'you're not going to make it,' it might have been something like, 'Hey, Bob, take a look at your altitude. You're going through 15,000 feet. You're 16,000 feet. Your nose is still in the vertical. And our area is at 23. You don't have enough room. So let's knock this one off. Or go ahead and recover. We'll try it again. And begin your loop a little bit further down in the area, maybe around 11,000 or so. And that gives you plenty of room to get over the top. What we call an over-the-top maneuver usually required about 8,000 feet. So instead of giving me instruction, he just sat there and ragged on me. The next experience I had with him was in extended trail. I was struggling early on in the extended trail. The lead portion didn't go too bad, but trying to maintain a position, what was it, 500 to 800 feet back from the leader in a cone, 30-degree cone, something like that, and then we would maneuver as required to maintain that position. Well, I wasn't quite getting it for some reason or another. And it was really troubling to me because I loved extended trail in pilot training. I always had a ball with it, never had any problems with it. So this one day we came down and he started ragging on me for not being aggressive enough or with this, that, or the other. And when we got off that day, about 2 o'clock, I guess it was, somewhere around there, I went over to the flight surgeons and just on a hunch. And I said, hey, I'd like to get my eyes checked. I said, I don't think I'm seeing everything I need to. And so we sat down, they gave me an eye exam, and sure enough, my eyes had begun to deteriorate. Well, they called over to Brooks Air Force Base and gave them the formula for glasses and sent me over to Brooks to pick them up the next day, I guess. So I went back in the next morning, and I guess it just referred to the jerk. The jerk was also the or the flight scheduler. So I walked in, they had me scheduled to fly, and I said, hey, I can't fly today, I'm DNF. DNF is duty not to include flying. And he kind of looked at me, and I said, yeah, I said, seems like I'm having some eyesight issues, so they've ordered a pair of glasses. So he says something like, when did you find this out? And I said, well, after we got done flying. I said, I just thought maybe I ought to go get my eyes checked because I said I've never had problems with extended trail before or anything like that. So I said, sure enough, looks like I need glasses. He says, you found this out last night? And I said, yeah. Why didn't you call me last night? He says, oh, I don't know. Maybe I just didn't want to be ragged on anymore that particular night. I don't know. So that's kind of the way we butted heads throughout the program. When I graduated in May, about 8 or 9 months later, I coasted down to San Antonio on a weekend cross country and ran into him at the Auger Inn. And when I ran into him, he came up and he says, Holliker, he says, I'm surprised to see you're still alive. And I said, well, through no fault of your own. I said, he said, something about, I didn't think you learned very much. And I said, well, probably the most important thing I learned during the program was you don't have to be a jerk to be a good IP. And he just kind of looked at me, and then I just turned and walked away. I thought, you know what, just give it up, let it go. And I did. Now, Dale Masuda was another guy we had, and Dale was of Japanese descent, really a great guy. And we became good friends at Vance after we both got back there. So one day, Dale and I are up flying an extended trail and together. And this time, Dale was having problems keeping me in sight. So I don't know what it was. A 38 is really hard to see when you're following right behind him. And if the leader's not thinking about it and he drags you through the sun, then all you see is something like that. And that, from 500 to 800 feet, is really kind of hard to see. And especially if you're looking into the sun. And Dale lost sight of us a couple times. So we had to break it off and then go find each other and so forth. And that eats up a lot of time. And that time is precious when you're learning. So anyway, the jerk started ragging on him. He says, how'd you happen to lose him at this particular time? And Dale says, well, he said, when the lead went through the sun, he said, I just lost him in the sun. And the jerk said, well, have you ever tried squinting? And Dale looked at him with his best Japanese look, and he says, all the time. And the jerk just kind of, okay, fine. Then we had Tom Nelson. Tom was a great guy. I just love the heck out of Tom. And we later flew together at Northwest Airlines and still laughed about this story. So when we went through PIT at that time, they had a new program they were going to institute they were looking to cut back on manpower where they could. So they thought the individual flying instructors could also teach academics, and you wouldn't have to pull it apart into two different modules. So they tried that experiment, and by the way, it didn't work. But anyway, so we would break up into seminars, and they would have one of the instructors lead the seminar on this, that, or the other. So this one day, now this wasn't with the jerk, it was with another IP in the flight, but still it kind of speaks to how we handled it. So the subject of the seminar this morning was navigation sorties, and they're going through all the things that we had to do to prepare for cross-country navigation rides. And it went from planning to how to handle the aircraft at outbases and so forth, refueling and so forth. So the IP running the seminar says, all right, when you land at an outbase, what's the first thing you want to think about? And Nelson shoots his hand up. The women! The IP did not expect that. None of us did. But the IP just looked at Tom and went, you idiot. Well, Tom was single, so I mean, that was just a natural thought to him. The women! So we moved on from that one. Now, Jim McDonald, the tanker guy, was a little bit more subtle, and he enjoyed playing mind games with the jerk. So he would be up flying with him, and it'd be kind of a lull in the instruction or in the berating period, if you will. And Jim would come up with, "Sir," he would say, "why do you think so-and-so doesn't like you?" And that's all he had to say. And the jerk would take it in and maybe not reflect on it right away, but boy, he was thinking about it, and it just wore him out. "Why do you think so-and-so speaks so poorly of you?" And so forth. And that was good for about 2 or 3 weeks for the jerk to chew that over. So that's kind of how we dealt with this guy, to keep our sanity, if you will. And as far as I know, Dale and Tom, and I never did see much of Jim after we graduated, but we all went on to really have good instructor pilot careers, and it was always good seeing those guys. One last story I want to add to this while I'm here at PIT. They didn't call us students. They thought that would hurt our feelings, I guess. I didn't care what they called us, so they called us trainees. So because we were already pilots and yada yada. Okay, you want to spend your time arguing about that, you go right ahead. Anyway, one of our other trainees was a guy named Big Al. Now, Big Al got his name because he was big, and his name was Al. Oh, how about that? So anyway, Big Al was a nice guy. I liked him. I don't know what, there was something about him I just liked. He was a young Faith, a first assignment IP from Laughlin. So Big Al comes through the program, and you couldn't help but like him. So one day he's up flying with Bob Lytle, Two Beer Bob. And Two Beer got the name because he could not quite drink 3 beers. He could drink 2 beers okay, but 3 beers just wasn't his thing. So anyway, he's up flying with Two Beer, and they were doing pitch outs and rejoins in formation. Now, a pitch out and a rejoin, you got 2 airplanes like this, leaders here and number 2s here, and 300 knots, 17,000 feet usually. The leader goes into a 60-degree bank turn for 180 degrees. Number 2 counts 4 seconds, and then he goes into a 60-degree bank turn, and then he rolls out a mile behind the leader. And when the leader figures he's back there and ready to go, he rocks his wings left, right, left, and starts a turn to the left. And then number 2 starts his rejoin coming in. He'll pick up in the beginning, about 20, 30 knots of overtake while the leader maintains 300 knots. So this one day they're up there, and the lead does his pitch out, and he rocks left, right, left, and starts his turn. Well, Big Al lost sight of the leader, but he didn't say anything to Two Beer. So he loses sight, and he figures, okay, this is about the right time out to start the rejoin. So he figures he went to the right. So he's sitting back there instructing on how to do this rejoin. And Two Beer's sitting up front and he's watching the leader go off to the left and they're going to the right. So he says to Al, how are we looking? He says, well, we're in a little bit of a tail chase right now. He says, but you can see we're beginning to gain on him. See, it was Al's job to practice his instruction on turning rejoins. So Two Beer's sitting there watching the leader go off on his own. He said, well, how are we looking now? He said, well, we're a little bit low, so he says, I'm starting to correct. Well, Two Beer looks in the mirror and Al's sitting back there like this, looking like crazy for the leader. Well, it's not going to happen. So finally, Two Beer let him go about as far as he could, and he takes the airplane. He says, all right, I have the airplane. And he rolls it and starts downhill so he can get a lot of smash so he can catch up to the leader. And Big Al says, I suppose I just pinked this right. And Two Beer says, that'd be correct. A pink is a fail. So anyway, those were a couple of the lighthearted experiences that we had at PIT. Hope you enjoyed the story.